Phil.
You talk about, both you and Mr Hastie, about not cutting elsewhere in defence. But is it not the case there's always a fair bit of fat around in defence, that there could be some savings found without harming operational capabilities or capacities as well?
I'm sure there are some savings, and the government can detail that. But for example, I mean, when we were in government, we put just under $10 billion into the Australian Signals Directorate. Now, long before there's any kinetic action in any possible scenario into the future, or naval blockades, or whatever it is that people are talking about, you're likely to see cyber attacks and denial of services here, attacks on our infrastructure. All of that is the reality, and so you need to make sure, for example, that they're not going to be stripping money out of red spice, which is an incredibly important element of the government's defences. It's not just at sea or on land, but it's in the virtual world and in space that we need to be very careful of our capacities and our capabilities. And again, I think it's important that if the government's planning to strip money out of defence, as Andrew points out, what are the programs? What's the logic behind that? Why is that deprioritised? And what does it mean in terms of the local companies and those defence manufacturers here in Australia that are part of that important supply chain?
Mr Dutton, you say that we shouldn't be cutting from defence. So what is the alternative? Where should this money be coming from?
Well again, I mean, the government's got a budget coming up in May, so no doubt they'll detail some of this. If they can identify savings within the budget, they'll do that, no doubt. If they're proposing new taxes, they'll do that. If they're proposing further debt, they'll do that. Well, they're the government, and they'll no doubt provide all of that detail to you. But I think the most important element here is that we need to achieve the capability, given the circumstances that we're in at the moment. Everybody agrees with that, and we've exactly the reason we started the negotiations in AUKUS in the first place. But it needs to be done at the least possible cost in the quickest time possible. And that's what the government will lay out. At the moment, I just think listening to some of the rhetoric this morning, there's a bit of a magic pudding episode going on here, that somehow the money's going to appear, or that it's going to be cost neutral. This is not a cost neutral decision. And the government should be very clear to the Australian public about that. And appropriately, the money is being spent because the times demand it. This is the most significant undertaking in our country's history. We need to be transparent with the Australian public that there is a cost attached to it, because we want to preserve peace in our region, and we want to provide stability and security for our country and for our near neighbours and for our region.
During your briefings, were your concerns about the UK production line allayed, and are you happy with the plan to send Australian workers and Australian investment to the US and to the UK to acquire that capacity?
Well, I'm not going to go into to the briefing that we've had, other than to say very grateful for the time the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister Conroy were able to spend with us. One of the very early decisions we made in AUKUS was to send Australian personnel across to the UK and the US to enrol in their programs, and there are some people that are a fair way through, I think, part of that course already. The United States has a higher degree of education or requirements, particularly for those that are going to be in charge of the boats, and so that's going to be a long lead time. So of course I support as much training as can take place. I remember saying to you a few months ago that one of my concerns in AUKUS was not about the acquisition of the submarines, it was about the crewing, and whatever we can do to bring crew from the US and the UK to Australia, whatever we can do to jointly crew, and as you know, in different operations over a long period of time, our people have been on both the US and the UK boats, but not in a position where they've been allowed to look at the nuclear technology. So there's a zero base in some regards here, and that'll be built up. And as I say, Jonathan Mead's as good as they come. So I'm sure he'll be working through all of that. So I support that very much.